Hello there, Sir from 17 once again. This is my NieR Automata very hard walkthrough. This is the 9S campaign, and this is where his particular playthrough becomes slightly divergent than the previous one we did. So for the purposes of this video, chapter 8 and 9 are going to be together. So you'll notice immediately we're doing something unique only to this character, which are the hacking moments, which carry this very interesting aesthetic, and they have you doing some pretty weird stuff in the grand scheme of the game. I'd love to have been a fly on the wall when these moments were being designed, because I wonder what the true intention of them was. Because for the purpose of this particular one, we're literally driving around this interesting looking environment, and we're holding triangle. That's it. You can still shoot, and occasionally you will be assailed in these moments, but in the kind of storytelling ones where you're listening to a lot of exposition, the only thing I can think of as the purpose of this gameplay right now is to give the player something to do while dialogue is given to them. And a lot of games have different ways of approaching how this is done, and I don't think this is a particularly imaginative or interesting one, but I do think it's head and shoulders above, you know, the Gears of War, tried and tested, everybody holds their hands to their ears and walks slowly through an area, because I was always not a fan of those moments, because as a player, once you get past that initial storytelling, and it'll probably be the same with this, you know, once you've done the story, once you've played for the plot, and you've got all the mysteries and the epiphanies are all learnt to you, these moments fall kind of flat, and you can't skip them. That was the thing that was always a hindrance in Gears until later on in the game's cycle, where you could actually skip those conversations and you could press a button and Marcus would tell the people to shut up. And it was a really interesting innovation because it enabled the people who wanted to replay, they didn't have to sit through that piece of forced narrative. And then you come to this particular game, which handles it in a better way, I think, but at the same time it still suffers from the same eventuality, which is the people who have already done this, who are coming back to this again, this is literally going to be an area of the game that feels inflated and time-wasting, because all it's doing is arbitrarily giving us pieces of information to pick up the pieces of what happened in the previous interim between what was the last mission and what is, of course, this mission. And then there's that one just then where you get to do some of the shooting, which is a little interesting. But I'm curious as if there was any intention at the beginning for there to be more of an emphasis on the hacking world. Because the idea of it is fun enough, isn't it? You know, you traverse through these areas being fired at by all these different shmup sequences, and then you hack stuff and you find information. There's even those little like movement areas where you're going between the different highways and whatnot. All of it has the idea of building towards maybe something better, because I don't mind these moments at all. I think that they offer something very different in a game that is a very specific thing. And then later on, of course, you have that kind of strange moment where you're listening to the story of those two girls, and they're from previous NieR and Drakengard games, so it's like a massive fan moment for people who love this series. But all you're doing there is listening to two people talk. It's one person narrating to you and you just reading text, and a lot of people had a go at that part of the game, saying that, you know, the kind of forced like visual novel aspects, or whatever you would call it, were not wanted, but I didn't mind that moment at all. I don't know if you can skip it on future playthroughs, but as long as you can skip that when you don't want to read it, that was one of my favourite parts of the game, because it was delivering a story in an interesting way. It reminded me a lot of Lost Odyssey, where in Lost Odyssey there were these sequences where you went into dreams, or he explained dreams to you, because I think the main character was some kind of dream walker or something. It's been a long time since I played that game. But the dreams were my favourite part of that game, because they were the place where the writing was at its strongest. And I really enjoyed that, the two redheads' little story about, you know, kind of being ostracised in a world where they were no longer needed. I thought it was really good. It was a fun part of the game for me. Unlike right now, where I think even the hardcorest of fans can agree that, admittedly, I think I went the wrong way here, which is why this might take a bit longer than it should. But it's one of those moments, you know, where you commit to one path and you keep moving, hoping that you're going to go in the right direction. It can take a long time to loop around, and it leaves you with a lot of downtime. And it seems like one of those sequences that, like this part right now, this stuff was really fun. I'm a big fan of the shooting sequences, and I wonder how difficult this was to design, because you know, when you think about it, aside from the particle effects and the nice motion graphics when things explode, it's all basic shapes, isn't it? It's like a student game. Not to try and insult students, because they make fantastic games, all considered, but it's such a strange thing to put in a game, and it's one of those moments where I always like quiz to myself what I would have been thinking if I would have added something like this. And it's the same type of questions that people asked, you know, when the gummy ship was happening in Kingdom Hearts, because there was a lot of hate for the gummy ship, mainly because it was forced on the player, and it took forever, and it was kind of slow and unintuitive and not that interesting on the first game. But then I thought they made it really fun in the second game, and then of course they removed it. So it's one of those things where it's like, I wonder why they took that out. Do you think they took it out because they felt like they'd gone to the logical extension of where they could take that mechanic? Because it seems kind of strange to me. Like they had better technology, they had more time to think about how to make it better or how to make it different or how to, you know, incorporate it, and instead they just vouched to remove it. And then in Birth by Sleep, you moved around the universe, didn't you? Like it was Mass Effect, and you just parked upon the planets, and there was no real gummy ship at all necessary. I always kind of chalked that one up, though, to the fact that in you know, the canonical fiction of the world, the gummy ships had not been invented. But those Keyblade, like, glider things were just as adept as a gummy ship and would have worked perfectly fine. And they could have had some really interesting shooting sequences, they just chose not to. But back in the moon base, checking through the areas, going towards the waypoint, and moving towards our next objective. So I mentioned in the previous video, I don't know if it was in this one or if it was in the Mass Effect one, but there's been some DLC announced for this game, and apparently it's going to have an arena, and you're going to be able to fight the CEO of Square Enix or something silly like that. So I don't know if that's something that, you know, Yoko Taro does a lot, if it's like one of his gimmicks. But it should be interesting for the people that really like the game, because getting DLC so soon is kind of awesome. I always see a bit of a double-sided sword, though, when it comes to DLC, because in my opinion, it should have probably been in the game. And I appreciate that we live in a culture now of gaming where they take out a lot to sell to us later. They kind of cannibalize their own game for the purposes of feeding us content later. And I really don't like that practice personally. I would prefer to just simply make a full finished experience, and then if it does well sales wise, maybe give them some production time and a budget to make something additional, so then they don't have to feel like everything has to be justified to why it exists, and they're forcing and squeezing and trimming and trapping, and, you know, just essentially hung, drawn and quartering their games, which is hard to say when you try and say hanging, drawn and quartering. It doesn't roll off the tongue the same, which if you don't know what that particular form of execution / torture was, Google that thing. The fact that human beings are at their most creative a lot of the times when it comes to hurting each other is pretty sick, but I am a fan of how interesting it is when it comes down to getting creative to hurt our fellow species. Like crucifixion. Crucifixion's a fun one, isn't it? Hanging people up where their rib cage is essentially so heavy on themselves that they suffocate. I think an evil genius came up with that one. And speaking of an evil genius, we're now dressed up as like Pope Robot, and we're going to be running around in this particular area. And this is a nice fun moment, because if you've done this sequence as 2B, which you have to get to this 9S playthrough, you'll understand why this area is kind of rough when you play as her, because it's pretty long. You know, it's got some interesting traps waiting for you, some interesting difficulties, and then you play as 9S and you can just kind of skip all of it. You can hack them if you want to, you can mess around that way, but you most definitely do not need to. You can just kind of completely circumvent this entire area, and I found that really interesting, because as 2B you do a big area here, and then you do a boss fight, and that boss fight's kind of tricky when you first play it. Whereas as 9S, you don't do any of the area, you don't do any of that boss fight, and then when you do regain control to when you are with 2B, it's almost completely skipping this sequence that she played as her. And I wonder if how much time, you know, they put into the idea of what 9S was doing while all of this was happening, because it seems like the go-to tool that they used was to make it some kind of hacking section, was to go in there and essentially, you know, justify his existence by saying that he helped her in the background by making doors open and things. And of course, if you were simply just opening doors, it would probably be quite boring. But it is interesting how they did it, and it's a nice opportunity to listen to some more of the great music. But the first time you get hacked, I'm curious if anybody remembers the first time they got hacked on this game, because it was so funny and so strange, and such a perfect representation of what this game is, in my opinion. Like, just a really, really fucking goofy experience, and I think that's probably the best compliment I can give this game, and as far as that. I'm not quite the person who thinks it's the most important game of the last 10 years, because you'd have to be playing board games to think that. And that's insulting board games. Oh, and you want to be careful coming up. There is an axe guy that you have to either avoid or fight, and dodging in these robots is kind of tricky. You're not quite as versatile as you were when you play as the characters. You can hack him if you want to, but because he's quite a high level hack, the hack will be quite ambitious, and on very hard it can be easy to fail them. So I leave it up to your discretion, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to bait him towards these steps, and hopefully he doesn't instantly kill me with his spinning, lingering hitbox. He does an attack that lingers. That's not the one. The overhead is quite fair. It's the spinning one. The spinning one has really active frames, and if he touches you with it, it's just game over in this road. This is it. Oh no, he did the jump again. So this is a good pattern this time. He's giving me the moves I need, and I'm trying to jump to stay ahead of him, but I should just be running at this point. Running is a better strategy here, but I decided to do some jumping. It was working out for me, and then once you pick up some speed, you can continue onwards. And funnily enough, the reason we're doing this is so that we can open that door for 2B so that she can get out of that area. Because you know when she was locked in the elevator, and it's like, oh my god, there's a machine here, and it turns out it's okay, it's 2B or 9S, sorry, or whatever. This is literally the struggle that you didn't see. 9S's little journey here to get to her to open up that door, and right now it wants you to hack into the guy who's flying with the axe. The reason that it's useful to do this is because he can literally levitate over the conveyor belt, and it makes moving on the conveyor belt way more fun. But once again, use caution, folks, because the crushing action here will instantly kill you, and you'll have to respawn. But it seems like your buddy doesn't want anything to do with us, which is quite nice. Like, I think this is a fun sequence. I like the idea of having all the machines operating and having all the environmental hazards and the threats, but I just don't feel like it complements the way that the game is designed very well, in as much as the save point and the checkpoints and things of that nature. Like in a lot of contemporary games, when you got to a sequence like that and you were to fail, it would be judged by per room basis, so you wouldn't have to be, you know, backtracking and doing too much again. Whereas in this game, they really do like to make you replay moments. This section's actually really good for that in the defense of Automata, because you go back to where you hacked the creature that continued this little journey. So it's actually a lot better checkpointed here when we play as 9S as it ever was as 2B. And I received a comment the other day from somebody mentioning that on the prologue, the checkpoints there seem to be a lot better these days, and I don't know if that's a patch or what, but I know from empirical evidence that there wasn't a checkpoint on that section, because I tried those areas and got romped a few times. And I even tried them on normal to see if the checkpoint was different, and it wasn't. So it might have been one of the generic fixes that they implemented, which is really good of them. Because can you remember when the game first came out and it was the Japanese version that people were playing? They didn't want people getting too far on it, so they intentionally sabotaged the game apparently and made it so that it didn't save correctly and it didn't do what it was meant to do. All because they didn't want, you know, people putting stuff up on YouTube and showing off the game, which I really don't understand that kind of mentality at all. I can understand it from the perspective of not wanting people to be spoiled, but that just seems like you're spiting the people who bought your game. And I appreciate there's many people that don't do anything to do with YouTube, and YouTube shouldn't, you know, lead the market on everything, and I agree with that, you know. You should play games fundamentally for fun, and then everything else can come after that, depending on what you're doing. But the thing with this is it leads to these crazy practices that just seem really counterintuitive to the game's success. Look at Atlas at the moment. Persona 5 is this fantastic JRPG which I think looks absolutely amazing, and I can't wait to play it. You know, it's getting rave reviews, everybody's really enjoying it. And then Atlas have these really barbaric principles when it comes to what you can and can't share on your streaming and on your YouTube and things, and like they justify it by saying that they're using it to, you know, to defend the game and the plot and the spoilers and things so that people can enjoy it for themselves. But like, if you don't want to be spoiled, why would you be watching footage of that game on YouTube? It's one of those weird things. And admittedly, it's easy to get spoiled on YouTube because in order to get stuff found in the search engine, you have to use generally accurate titles and accurate tags. That's kind of how it works. And there are those instances where there's a lot of videos, you know, with the name of bosses and the name of areas and the name of potentially spoiler encounters, big all in bold on the front page of YouTube, and you do that where you see it and you're like, oh fuck, I can't go back now. And that is frustrating, you know, it happens a lot. Happens a lot to me with UFC. And I have to be careful where I look because I don't watch UFC live because of course it's on America time. And I don't have the channels to do it. But I generally watch it afterwards, and if I go on any kind of social media, I have to be incredibly careful, so I just don't until I've watched it. It's one of those things that you have to do. But it was the same thing with NieR, if you played NieR. The day NieR came out, if you went on YouTube, it was just hundreds of boss videos with boss names and everything. Like, I knew Nobunaga Oda was in that game before I'd even played it, because it was on the front page of my YouTube recommended videos. It was like a bunch of like boss walkthroughs and stuff. And luckily, I'm one of those people that I don't really care. As long as you're not, you know, would you kindly spoiling shit, then I'm okay with it. Because a lot of the stories in video games are generally not all that interesting. And when they are interesting, I haven't been spoiled, fingers crossed. So it does lead to an interesting, you know, argument of, do they have a leg to stand on, you think? Well, of course, they own the rights to that game, and we're just creatively using fair use to make this something that we're able to pop here for other people's enjoyment. But I don't think anybody could argue the fact that when you watch a streamer play a game, it makes you want to play that game. When you watch a streamer play, or watch someone on YouTube do something on a game, it makes you want to play it. And it might be one of those experiences that we've all had where we see somebody playing a game we've got and we've not played it in a while, and we're like, oh my god, I kind of want to play this now. You're making this look really fun, and then you put it on, and it's horrible. You know, like, you have a terrible time, you turn it off after 10 minutes, and you'll probably never go back. But didn't it make you play it? It did. So, as much as you can say that this whole, you know, YouTube saturation, and Let's Play saturation, and streaming saturation that's happening on the internet right now is a negative thing for whatever reason, it is undoubtedly something that breeds both marketing, which is free for the company, it gets exposure and brand recognition out, it gets all these impressions and all these prospective customers, and at the end of the day, people buy it. And especially if it comes from a recommendation. Like, I've been reading recently on the internet that apparently NieR was dead on arrival. Have you heard about this? I haven't, because I love that game. But it turns out that a lot of Souls streamers got that game quite early, and they were kind of the front line of the marketing for it, and a lot of them weren't that impressed by the game because it wasn't like Souls once you got, you know, right down to it. So instead of you know, maybe opening up to a new type of genre or a new type of system with fighting mechanics and interesting bosses and what have you, they just didn't really like it. And just based on their impressions and not really finding much enjoyment in it because it's not like Souls, they kind of killed the game. The impression of the game on Twitch is very negative at this moment. There's not many people streaming it. There's a lot of people who might like to stream it but won't because it's kind of like a barren area of Twitch. And it's just this strange thing of like, I got none of this because I didn't watch anybody stream that game. I just played it, and that game is fantastic. I can't imagine anybody not enjoying it, really. Oh, this is really kind as well. You know this moment right here? Look how many times I'm dying and it's not taking any life off me. I was actually quite worried about these parts on very hard, but it turns out the game is immaculately checkpointed and balanced for those sequences. Almost too much. Like, I wouldn't mind going back a little bit in this area because the shmup sections are quite fun when they're spaced correctly. But it decided to be very generous, which is kind of weird, considering, you know, other areas are not that kind. But it can be interesting how popular opinion or these popular streamers can have this kind of effect on games. And it doesn't necessarily mean anything about the game. It's not a reflection of the game, it's the reflection of the person who's playing it. Because any game can be enjoyable if it has the right criteria that pleases you. This is a really cool part as well. Look at this. This is what I was hoping to see a lot more of. It's just really, really interesting. Bullets everywhere, all kinds of madness going on. And look at that, it gave you a checkpoint. Who would have known? Like, I don't think that should have given me that. I think I should have to earn this one. Because this, to me, is challenging. And this is a good kind of challenge. Because I have to play well, or I don't get any further. But yeah, the difficulty balancing on NieR Automata is really bad. It's probably the worst balancing I've ever seen Platinum do, which is very disappointing. But then again, I've not played the original NieR, so maybe this is classic NieR balancing, which is to say, garbage tier. But look how fun this is! if you like shooting games, it's simple, but I think this looks really fun. It's intimidating, but, you know, this is what shmups are when you play the Dan Maku ones and the curtain fire shooters. Like, if you're a big fan of Cave, like I am. Oh, this is rough. Yeah, didn't space that very well. But I don't think this would be too unrealistic to have you do it on 1 credit, and this would actually be quite challenging then. I'm just losing it now, aren't I? Just losing all the rhythm that I had. Getting bummed. But yeah, this is a cool one, this. Probably my favourite shooting section in the hack. And then you get to this point, and then the pattern's super simple, because it's just two gyrating waves, isn't it? As long as you keep ahead of it, it's simple stuff. But why wasn't there more areas of the game like that? Crazy, awesome, fun, intense hacks. Could have been really good. But funnily enough, what you just watched then was the 9S equivalent of that boss fight. That's what we were doing. We might have been, I believe, bringing down that boss's shield so that she can fight it. Because if you remember, at the beginning of that encounter, you can't even hurt it. But thank you for watching, guys, and you take care now.